This is Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Hello everybody and welcome to The Late Late Show, where I'm joined tonight by James Bruce, a Head of Department for Film Studies and a fellow English teacher. And tonight James and I will be exploring how effective and evolutionary film studies is becoming in education, as well as discussing the impact films can have in your subject and within the curriculum.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTO. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Teaching is a rewarding profession, but it comes with its fair share of challenges. That's where ADAPT come in. We're not your typical trade union, but instead a modern, apolitical alternative, offering expert legal, employment and mental health support. Protection without the politics. So what makes ADAPT different? We're always apolitical and independent, specialised solely in supporting individual teachers. Our caseworkers are professionally qualified, ensuring you always get the best advice. Plus, there's 24/7 mental health support. Whether it's a simple contract check or handling serious allegations, ADAPT are here for you. Join the thousands of educators who've chosen ADAPT to protect their careers. Subscribe at adapt.uk today. ADAPT, supporting school staff, protecting careers.
Hello everybody and welcome to The Late Late Show with myself, Richie, here at Teachers Talk Radio. If you didn't catch my previous episode with James Dean, an online educator last week, please go back and re-listen to the conversation where we explored how effective online education is, highlighting the benefits for students, teachers and parents when education online is done correctly. It was a really, really good podcast, really knowledgeable, all about assessment, all about making sure that students are getting the very most out of education. So please do go back and have a look. This week, I am pleased to say I'm joined by James Bruce, a person I know well after spending a couple of years working with James, who in reality has shown me the ropes in everything film studies and beyond. The first of many film puns this episode, I am sure. You know, when it comes to film studies, I think it's a really, really important thing that we talk about actually what film is in the curriculum, because for me, film was always something that you could do as a really good lesson. And, you know, as in like, hey, the film's coming out. And I remember when I was, you know, in year 7 or 8, the teachers bringing this massive telly in this massive cage and all of us cheering when it got wheeled through because we knew we was in for a little bit of an easy ride, a little bit of a good lesson. However, film now, for me, is something I use as a tool. You know, film for me is something that I use as something to inspire students to actually maybe give them a different input, to maybe give them a different way in. And, you know, plot and character are really, really important, especially in the literature exams. But actually, to visualize and to be able to see these characters as Shakespeare intended. For example, if we look at Romeo and Juliet, then it just gives a different dynamism. And for me, that's a really powerful tool now. And I think the film within the curriculum, I'm sure James will tell us in a moment, has really evolved. I think James is in now. Just a brief background then. James has been teaching for 17 years and has been teaching film for 5 years, as well as teaching English and drama too. James, thank you so much for joining me. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, Jet. Not too bad. I can hear you now.
So I had to leave and come back. I do apologise for that.
That's okay. Absolutely no problem. And I'm glad that you're here. It would be great for any teacher, as I've mentioned, not just in film or English, where, of course, we adore the adulation and admiration of Baz Luhrmann's masterpiece, which is Romeo and Juliet, to the benefit using our films in lessons. I mean, nothing for me personally hit quite as hard as watching the 1977 TV miniseries Roots in History to truly highlight the horrors and disbelief of slavery in 1950. As much as you can read about the horrendous actions of what happened, there is nothing more powerful than seeing it occur on screen. Was there or has there ever been a moment like that for you at all?
Well, funny enough, you should mention Basler and Romeo and Juliet. When I started teaching, that was like the cool new thing. Used to show that. So, but make sure the kids knew Romeo and Juliet don't meet through a fish tank. There's no petrol station. It's really good for having the proper language, but the fact that it's completely different visuals. You know, so I think what's quite sobering is the fact that it's now really old, that film. Like, kids now don't think of it as a new modern. It's like the first time a couple of years ago, I had a class that actually preferred the Zeffirelli version. But teaching Romeo and Juliet through film was my favourite thing to do when I was doing English at Key Stage 4, especially with some low ability classes. I generally show them a version, either Zeffirelli or Basler, and then we'd read the scenes that have an idea of going on. Then we'd watch the other with an idea that you can interpret something in a different way, which is really kind of the key to Shakespeare. So, for example, Act 3, Scene 1, spoiler alert, where Tybalt and Mercutio die. If you can have a spoiler alert, just so you 25 years old. In the two different versions, it's portrayed very different. One of them, Tybalt's an absolute monster who's out for blood. He's messing around. And when the kids watch that, they go, "Oh, there's not just one way of reading. You can interpret it in different ways," and it kind of opens their minds to, there's not just one way that Shakespeare meant. You tell it a different way. Then you say, that's just two versions from two films from the same century. Imagine how many different ways Tybalt and Mercutio and Romeo have been portrayed over the last 4.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to make as well. It's all about the adaptations in films and making sure that, students respect the film to somewhat degree. But again, as a literature examiner, I have seen several times where, whereas the theme of violence portrayed in Romeo and Juliet, most people allude to, well, they blew up a petrol station early on. And of course that, you have to be very, very careful and you have to be very responsible when showing films. And that is a common trap that, students can sort of go down. For me, I recall actually doing my Romeo and Juliet coursework when I was in year 11, based around that scene. Another, experience for me where film really helped me cement an understanding. Yes, it wasn't, another Shakespeare playing Macbeth, but actually seeing Macbeth and seeing how tyrannically was and how brutally was actually on screen, for me, it's really difficult to see that in a play. And it's really difficult for me to, as a student, for me to say, well, is he really that bad? He just wants to be king, So to actually see all of the horrors which he has to endure and which he has to go through to do that, I think it's so visual, but also actually really insightful to try to see something on the screen. Are there any other films at all, perhaps, that you have seen that you've also, had that effect with?
Definitely. So teaching A-level, both Lang Lit and literature, Streetcar, always do Streetcar. And the film version of that in the 1950s is directed by Elia Kazan, basically the same cast as was in its original production. So it's the closest you're ever going to get to actually being to what Tennessee Williams would have seen, what his direct choice would have wanted. And it's really interesting that you watch that film with the kid and then say, well, that's not the same as the script you've just read. Because of film censorship in the 1950s, the studios were by themselves, it's really quite tame compared to the actual play. And it's very interesting to see. But you get the payoff of seeing Marlon Brando as Stan. No one else can ever really be Stan. No one else can ever really live up to what Marlon Brando is doing. But the payoff is, at the end, he doesn't seem anywhere near as nasty because they cut all the nasty parts off. And having that discussion and adding that to literature and Lang Lit, to a lesser extent, just saying, so how do you feel about standing there? And then we go and see it, say it at the theatre. They go, oh, Stanley wasn't as good, but it was interesting that the end was much more brutal, much harsher.
Okay. And again, so many students will watch films and so many will say, oh, did you see so-and-so? And did you see so-and-so? It's like, well, what did you like about that film? And then they can tell you everything about the character. But sometimes students actually struggle to do that with black and white. So again, using film curriculum is certainly a benefit. I mean, what's it like teaching film studies? Surely, as a film studies teacher, you see that more often than we do as English teachers or history teachers do, because you see it on a daily basis.
It's absolutely brilliant. It's fantastic. But today, I got to watch Pulp Fiction. I got to watch a bit of E.T. I got to watch some of Jaws, and we did a bit of a recap of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. So, I watched 4 different bits, completely different focuses, but all of them were really interesting. They're all really good films, and had really good discussions with the kids about, all the different, and Casablanca, sorry, just to complete my day. So yeah, it's great doing that. And the kids really enjoy it. They really do engage much more. Well, I wouldn't say all kids struggle with English, but certainly, some children find it difficult to, like you say, engage with just words on the written words on the page, whereas people watching films can really enjoy it.
So it's the start of a new academic year. Something that I would like to highlight before we start is obviously I've massively come to appreciate over the past few years is the film studies curriculum. When I first did film in my ITT year, it was almost like a bolt-on to English. It was the English teachers who also taught film because they sort of go together because they have the symbolism. And one of the films that we actually watched a trailer for was The Strangers. And it was all about, exploring the pathetic fallacy. It was all about exploring the darkness within, but it was also the contrast between the light and the dark. And, it was very analytical. But for me, it was very much like, okay, well, this is really English, but based around watching a film. So, again, there wasn't too much of a diversity about 10 years ago between film or media studies and the curriculum. I mean, what enticed you? You said that, you've been a film teacher for 5 years. What enticed you to become not only a film studies teacher, but also a head of department for a film studies department?
The opportunity just came up. I moved schools to my current school from my previous school where I had taught film studies. They taught film studies there, so a job came up to be a film studies teacher. I'm hoping I'm a little bit louder, by the way, now. I'm sort of shouting into the mic. The film head of department left in the middle of the year, and they said, would you mind stepping up and being in charge of that? I did, absolutely loved it, and then have taken on the job ever since. It's a dream job, basically, because as you say, it is very similar to English. It's got that visual element to it. I kind of lean on members of my team who are much stronger on the visual elements, but like photography and the camera angles and things, whereas I'm much more competent at dealing with narrative and characters and genre, and I can do historical context, all that kind of stuff. But it's just, I really enjoy doing it. I don't want to say it's easier than teaching English, but realistically it is. There's a lot less pressure on it than, when like old school. And the marking is easier because although there's essays at A level, at Key Stage 4, they're short answer questions. So it's just like having to...
Teaching is a rewarding profession, but it comes with its fair share of challenges. That's where ADAPT come in. We're not your typical trade union, but instead a modern, apolitical alternative, offering expert legal, employment and mental health support. Protection without the politics. So what makes ADAPT different? We're always apolitical and independent, specialised solely in supporting individual teachers. Our caseworkers are professionally qualified, ensuring you always get best advice. Plus, there's 24/7 mental health support. Whether it's a simple contract check or handling serious allegations, ADAPT are here for you. Join the thousands of educators who've chosen ADAPT to protect their careers. Subscribe at adapt.org.uk today. ADAPT. Supporting school staff. Protecting careers.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
RAC remains the top education story across many media outlets. BBC focusing on the impact the issue is having on universities across the UK. The news website refers to closures of lecture theatres, science labs and student unions. So far, 15 universities have told the BBC that they have closed or partially closed areas containing the reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete. Some lectures have had to be relocated, and a small number of universities have had to find alternative accommodation for students, as halls of residence have also been affected. This has placed additional pressures on universities already facing housing shortages, with charity Unipol suggesting that student housing shortages are going to get worse in some cities. Student numbers are growing, but the number of new rooms is tumbling. This is largely due to high building costs, older buildings falling into disrepair, and now RAC concerns are adding to the issue. Last week, the DfE published the list of 147 schools in England built using the concrete. 6 unions have now written to Education Secretary Gillian Keegan asking a series of urgent questions. The BBC says that Essex is the county in England with the most affected schools, with 25 closed, partly closed, or making alternative arrangements. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has dismissed suggestions that he was at fault for the concrete crisis. During Prime Minister's question time, he said his government had acted decisively, whilst opposition leader Sir Keir Starmer referred to him as Captain Hindsight. In Wales, only 2 schools have so far been affected by RAC, but First Minister Mark Drakeford said inspections were ongoing. In Scotland, Humza Yousaf has outlined his plans for the coming year, with a heavy focus on expanding childcare provision, saying it is the best way to support families. This plan includes the recruitment of 1,000 more childminders by 2026. Free childcare hours are being extended to 2-year-olds across the country. There will be a pilot of expanded care from 9 months to the end of primary in 6 local authority areas, and free school meals for P6 and P7 pupils moves forward. But those in receipt of the Scottish Child Payment will receive them first by 2024, with others following by 2026. Last week, Mr Yousaf also commented on the issue of banning single-use vapes, and linked this to the comments made about young people using vapes too often. He stated that the government will consult on curbing the sale of disposable single-use vapes, including consulting on an outright ban. According to The Guardian, teachers have staged walkouts over harassment by parents and students. Thousands of staff attended a rally in Seoul demanding better protection after a number of teacher suicides. Teachers are being increasingly vocal about their experiences of maltreatment, including being accused of child abuse after disciplining students. Around 15,000 teachers attended a rally last week, and some schools had to temporarily close due to a lack of staff. As of June 2023, 100 school teachers had died by suicide in the country since 2018. The current Education Ministry blamed the current situation on previous governments, saying that they had overemphasised students' human rights over teachers' rights. Finally, The Guardian also reports that a city in Japan is tackling a rise in truancy with the help of robots. 2 schools in Kumamoto have purchased mechanical assistants to help children regain confidence in dealing with teachers and their peers. It is hoped the robots will encourage children to attend classes remotely and eventually coax them back in person. The robots will be equipped with microphones, speakers and cameras. Students learning remotely will be connected to the robots via laptops, allowing them to attend and take part in discussions. The robots will not be confined to classrooms, but be free to roam so pupils can take part in other events and enjoy social times remotely too. Japan, like many countries, including the UK, is facing a rise in the number of pupils refusing to go to school since the pandemic. Could robots be the key to improvement? This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
This is 2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello, this week we've all returned to work and I'm going to discuss the old argument of digital or paper diary. For every argument for going digital, there's a counter-argument for not, and vice versa. You can access a digital diary from anywhere on any device, but if you don't have a signal, it's useless. A paper diary can't get hacked, but it can be picked up and read if left lying around. You get the point. I personally like a digital diary as it suits the way I work. I can add links to online meetings, add notes and attach documents. I can see my day, week, month, year at the click of a button. And the most useful thing for me is I get reminder notifications. One thing to consider if moving digital is policies on phones in your school, as this is the most likely way you'll access it on the move. And probably most importantly, if you're using your phone, will you be able to resist the notifications from other apps or emails you see when you switch it on to use it? Cost doesn't really apply as a factor because you probably already have a phone capable of running a digital diary. But work-life balance may need to be considered as the diary is there 24/7. This can, however, be remedied by using Do Not Disturb settings for notifications. In the end, It's a personal choice. Are you paper or digital? Let us know at TT Radio Official. I'm Steve Woods, and that was 2 Minute Tech.
2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
Early doors here then, James. Let's give the loyal listeners what they want straight away. How effective is showing films in the curriculum? We obviously briefly spoke about why it's effective. I mean, let's talk about how effective it can be.
So, I mean, when we were in English, you used to always hear, can we watch the film? Can we watch the film? We're film version of it. And do you know what? Teaching film studies, that hasn't happened the other way around. No one's watched Blade Runner and gone up and read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? I see film studies or studying film as kind of the pinnacle of literature, although albeit just with one interpretation. So instead of looking at, a book and saying, how would you visualize this? We look at a person's, a director's version of something. And they go, well, how could it be different? What are they trying to get us to do? When we get to things like spectatorship theory and the political context of when you make a film, for example, films that are remade every 20 or 30 years and how the political landscape would impact them. I just find that really, really interesting. A discussion I had with my film studies teachers and with my film studies department kids the other day was a bit like how now we've reached a stage in the superhero films where you can discuss who your favourite Batman was or who your favourite Spider-Man was in the same way you might discuss who you thought was best as Hamlet or best as Macbeth or whatever. And I just find that really, really interesting. So I absolutely, that's part of my job that I really, really love. I love the fact that we can do the same things we do in English. As I said, picking up genre, narrative, character studies, and that those things, doing that with my GCSE and A-level film studies students really helps them in English. I also help them how to write paragraphs. So when we do longer paragraphs in film studies, I use the same methods I would do in my English lessons. I use what, how, why. And I say to them, when you're doing this in English, you're just replacing mise-en-scène or cinematography with nouns, verbs, adjectives, similes, metaphors, etc. And they've all found that really, really, really helpful. In fact, many of the year 11s I just had tended to only do well in film and English at the expense of some of the other subjects. And I'm going to claim that was down to my teaching them how to write paragraphs. Absolutely. They find it fun, they find it engaging, and also we show them stuff that they would never see anywhere else, that they would never dream of watching. So, for example, we do a film called Sunrise. It's from 1927. It was the first film with sound, and then was immediately kind of superseded by the fact that you can have sound, whether you can have talking. But the jazz singer came out. But no kids are ever going to watch that. But now they do watch it, and they're forced to watch it, and they realise that because it's all visual, like, when they're watching at home for the second or third time, they have to put their phones down, they have to pay attention. We watch foreign films. We watch a film called The Wave in year 10, 11, which is a German film about the chances of the rise of fascism based on a thing from America. And it's absolutely brilliant. And they love it. They really, really love it. And they go, well, never would have watched that. And why would you? Why would you have watched an obscure German film from 2008? Also, we do documentary. And I know that has led some of our students to go off and watch documentaries, particularly by the same guy. So the guy who does Asif Kabadi, which we do, did a brilliant one in a similar style about Maradona. So as soon as I told all the boys who liked the football in my class that, they all went off and watched that and were like, this makes. So I really like that doing that as part of my job. Also, I always used to show films. So say when I had a Key Stage 4 class several years ago who really struggled with doing lots of reading, I would read them bits of War of the Worlds, and then we'd watch bits of Spielberg's version. Say, look how they made it more exciting, and it's all like thing, but it's not quite the same, is it? And they absolutely love that. And now the lessons I did for that are part of my year 9 curriculum for film. It's a completely different focus, but it's still effective, and hopefully they still.
Something that you mentioned earlier about, you watched E.T. Obviously, it's an absolute classic. It's such a great film, but I wonder how many of your students, if you would have said, right, who's seen the film E.T., because it is fairly dated now, which makes us both sound old, but I wonder how many students actually would have gone away and on their own perhaps watched E.T., or I know that you also studied Jaws, go away and watch Jaws, because the special effects, while it was absolutely incredible for those times, actually when you look back, like anything, it's evolutionary. I wonder how many of those students would have gone away and watched that film, and actually how many of them have enjoyed that film too. And again, it's like teaching anything within the curriculum, you're opening their minds up to something that they've never experienced before, but could have such a profound effect on them moving forwards.
It does, especially with that with ET, because we have to compare it in terms of genre to Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And the kids go, "Oh, he's already on." And I point out, well, ET's from the year I was born, so and I say, and Body Snatchers from the year my parents were born. So it's old for you, it was old for me as well. But yeah, they see it and they go, oh, it's like how literature is a view into the past and a way to see how people lived before. Films do the same thing, and it's now been around long enough as a medium that we can actually enjoy that and they can appreciate that.
Yeah, and we've got some people who are calling and texting in as well. Paul has said, I loved media studies at college, and I tried to use short films in writing in my Key Stage 2 class. And actually, Paul, I use lots and lots of short films, especially for like Gothic fiction. I think there's some really good Gothic shorts out on the internet. And when you're exploring Gothic fiction, sometimes it can be quite hard to get all of the elements within the Gothic. But actually, you could play a 10 or 15 minute short video, and all of the areas of Gothic are in there. So it's not just, the use of whole films, it's actually the use of short films and the use of media moving forwards. And surely, James, within your years teaching, you've seen that evolve so much more, over the past, I would say, decade, because I certainly feel that the use of media and multimedia and video and film have all played a massive part in the curriculum and education over the past 10 years.
Oh, definitely. I mean, like you, I remember them wheeling in the old TV, and it chained up, and it was a real treat until one kid had a watch that could turn it off. The teacher would be flummoxed. But yeah, having the interactive whiteboards, and my room's got surround sound and all that kind of stuff, it's a real, it's a different world to what we went to at school. On the subject of Key Stage 2 and using short films, by the way, there's a brilliant company called Into Film, and they provide free resources for schools, and they organised some trips for me last year. They've got loads of really well aimed, like they've got Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2, Key Stage 3, short films specifically for that, about a wide variety of things, so refugees or about nature. So that I can strongly recommend them as a good way of getting resources. I don't work for it, just saying. There's plenty on YouTube and there's plenty of other, but just there is really good resources out there of selected short films and things to show kids that will inspire them.
Yeah, I mean, obviously film relies on coursework, and when it comes to coursework, which obviously your subject requires, do you have any hints or tips or guidance for fellow teachers listening to us now when it comes to the submission of coursework? What is there any area that you insist on for students?
Yes, so there's lots of things I have to say about coursework. It's still really a work in progress. It's only my third year being in charge of coursework, and I've been involved in it before. I was really glad when coursework disappeared from English years ago. It's such a such an amount of stress, and in film studies, it's really, really useful. So when I first started, I took over the school's policy of you don't make the films, you just write screenplays. I have now extended that to we're going to write a screenplay, and then if you want to make the film, you are more than welcome to. But I want the screenplay so that if you don't get the film done, I've got something I can hand in. And I'd recommend that to other people. Yet still yet to get an actual film in, because as people discovered in the past, until you get someone who really wants to do it. But when that one student does really want to do it, it is going to be that budding filmmaker. It is going to go on to be the next Christopher Nolan. Then I want them to have the opportunity to have done that. The best bit of advice I would give, which is something I found in this school, is to have a good screenplay formatting program. So we use one, and it just means that the kids aren't spending, and you're not spending time formatting, center aligning and saying, well, that needs to be in block capitals, this needs to be this, and there needs to be this at the top of the page. It does it itself. And they can write it in Word, copy and paste it over, and then just right click it into the right places. That has saved so much hassle. It saves so much time. Like, you get some fun lessons teaching the kids that, and they write little screenplays. I showed them how easy it was by getting my 8-year-old daughter at the time, she's 10 now, by getting my 8-year-old daughter to write one. Okay, look, she wrote that in 20 minutes. Now you can check and they've all been really, really good since then. One thing I would say that I learned from last year is that if you get people who miss their drafts, because obviously the coursework guidelines only mark one official draft, and my sixth formers did not hand in, some of them did not hand in their storyboards, photo storyboards with their first draft, and that led to them handing in their photo storyboards with portrait photos. When I pointed out to them, when was the last time you saw a film in portrait mode? they couldn't answer because obviously there aren't any. And that's a schoolboy error not to be repeated by me and obviously not by them. Organisation is really important for sorting out coursework. We were picked apart the first year we had it, or it was a bit like I did inherit a group right towards the end. It was sort of February by the time I took over when they hadn't done it. So I've got an excuse. But since then, we've got really, really good at making sure we are on it. And one of the things we do is online. The students submit their work online. I convert it to PDFs, and then we can mark on there. And I get my colleagues in my department, we can all mark, and it leaves your initials on there. And then when it's sent off to the exam board, they can see that you've marked, you've moderated, you've cross-moderated, and they can see where you got your marks from. And it's meant that since then, we've had no marks moved and just been told we're an exemplary, exemplary example terms, an exemplary centre for marking coursework. The other thing I would say is with the rise of AI to look out for plagiarism, they are normally very obviously spotted because you can, the kids you teach and you can tell when they've written it, when they haven't. But obviously AI is making it easier and easier to create coursework from nowhere. And it's something that the government will have to look at. And it's not just going to be an issue for film studies. I think it might be an issue.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the rise of, plagiarism and certain websites that allow you to put in a question and that question then gets answered, copy, paste it into Word, there's your coursework, off you go. I think it is going to be, as you say, it's going to be a nationwide problem for people to tackle. When we actually had, I recall the days of IGCSE, and something in my department, my English department, that I insisted on and that heads of department insisted on was, yes, your drafts are in, but we're also not going to submit any coursework that's not ready to go. And I think that when students and parents understand that you are not just going to submit, what's not good, and I know that it's a lot more work for teachers, as you quite rightly said. But for me, coursework was something that if it wasn't handed in on on that draft date, we would be phoning parents relentlessly until they answered their phones. And that was a massive, massive difference. And perhaps, with the coursework element not being part of English, yes, it does help with the workload, but it almost sort of made it a little bit fair and not 100% exam as well. So you did sort of get more of a rounded body of work, a portfolio of work, rather than just 100% exams, 2 in language and 2 in literature as well. So
because there were people who worked really hard on their coursework, and I suppose they get the advantage at A level where they can produce next.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you think film studies then compares to other subjects? Because for me, English, film, drama, history, they work really well together in a cross-curriculum sense. So how, filming, I think film is actually growing. Film studies, the subject of film studies is growing. We're not quite at that psychology boom yet of where every Tom, Dick and Harry wants to do psychology, but I certainly think that film studies is getting there and it is growing.
I hadn't realised until I started teaching it how much we would have strong links with history. And I've had some really good chats with the head of the history department saying, well, when you're doing that, we should match up. So, for example, in A-level history, they do the Spanish Civil War. And then in year 13 film studies, we do Pan's Labyrinth, which is set in the immediate aftermath of the Spanish Civil War. And then I had a couple of students who'd say, yeah, we did this. And I was doing my context lesson. And they said, well, that's not entirely true. So what you actually find is blah, blah, blah. Franco did this, Franco did that. And it was really good. So I said, well, next time we'll make sure we collude on this and say, those of you are the experts. And they basically did their history, Spanish Civil War version by teaching the rest of my class the ins and outs of the aftermath of the Spanish Civil War. Also things like we do Casablanca, which obviously was filmed during the Second War. It was actually arguably a piece of American propaganda about joining the war. But I was able to tell my year 12s today that there's a mention of concentration camps. The character escaped from a concentration camp and saying, well, of course, at the time, they had no idea how bad concentration camps were. It wasn't until after the war when they soldiers went in there and saw what really happened. And I didn't realize how close it was going to link to history and how much it's being part of history and how important history A level was to it. Obviously, there's huge links with the English department. All our teachers are, like you said, part of the English department. We're all English specialists. And I think they do overlap really, really well. And it's a lot of the same skills. it's got a similar essay writing skill as well. I teach my essay writing for my A-level film studies in exactly the same way as I've done for years teaching A-level literature, in that, what are you trying to say? Tell us what you're going to say and then make a point, make an argument, convince me. And this is how you do it. This is how you include quotes. Obviously, it's not quotes from the film. It's going to be talking about cinematography, mise-en-scène, sound editing, or whatever. But it's basic skills. And then, of course, we have to do foreign language films. So there's been a crossover to the MFL department. Doing so, getting very good at showing films. You were saying, what is the impact of films in other curriculums? The amount of times I hear of MFL classes showing a film in a different language, because that's a way for kids to kind of absorb it a bit, like, learning a language by living in another country. If you watch Harry Potter in Spanish, you're going to pick up some Spanish because you know the story, you know what's going to go on in it, and you're just hearing it in Spanish instead.
Yeah, I didn't realise that MFL did that, and actually that's a really good strategy, to get students involved in that. And something that you said about cross-curricular, I've always wanted to actually have a project that ran across 3 or 4 departments. So you can take World War II, and you could take history, and you can put the boy in the striped pajamas in the novel, and then you could do some drama based around it, and plus the film. And I think, I personally have never been involved in that project, but I think for one half term it would be phenomenal just to say we are really honing down on this topic, and in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different subjects, that's what we're going to be doing. Imagine the knowledge that those students would get, but from different outlets and from different subjects based around that one knowledge. It would be absolutely incredible.
Doing a multi-faculty thing on Titanic. You could have the history of it, you could have the stories behind, read non-fiction about it, obviously the film, maybe with a certain bit cut out of it, but it would be really, really good. That'd be good at any school age, really. Key Stage 2, Key Stage 3.
And we never really see, it's always an idea in the secondary schools that I've worked at. It's always been an idea, and for one reason or another, it's just never quite mixed up. I think primary schools perhaps do this a lot better, that project-based exploration. I remember doing the Tudors when I was in year 6, and it must have stuck with me because I still remember doing it. I still remember doing that Tudors project. And, I'd like to be part of that project. And again, the curriculum and lesson time is so important, but actually if there's a subject worth teaching and the students worth knowing, and it's something to explore. Is there any advice that you would give to budding film studies teachers at all? Because as I said, the subject is growing, more and more numbers take it each and every year. So therefore there are hopefully going to be more opportunities for film studies teachers to do just that.
I would say, firstly, really enjoy it. You're lucky to be teaching a subject that's so much fun and so enjoyable, and so, teaching something you like, you would do for fun anyway. Something that's literally a leisure activity is now your job. And get advice from others. One thing I found really useful in the last few years is drawing on the advice of, as I say, experts. There's a young man in my department who's really good with photography and the use of colour and the use of, what is the different impact of different camera angles. Just on people who've taught it years before. So at the first year I did the coursework, I gave the class completely free rein, and a man in one of our schools in our trust said, well, I don't do that. He said, I said they can teach anything, but all my lessons are going to be guided them towards one particular genre. And he said, horror is the easiest genre for the weaker students. Do horror. And I said, well, that's a great idea. And I've said all my lessons are going to be about horror, but if anyone wants to do anything else, just convince me that you're able to do it and you can do it. And last year that was incredibly successful. I'd also say, do the films, get through them quickly. So I am an absolute, I cannot stop myself pausing films and talking through them. The kids hate it. They've always hated it. When I was doing it during English. And I said, well, because we're not here to just watch this. We're here to pick it apart. We're here to analyse it. But the head of department that I took over from, she used to say, well, no, they should watch it all the way through like they were going to the cinema. But actually I found that kids don't watch stuff all the way through anymore. They're so used to being able to pause television or be able to go back and watch things in different orders. They quite like me making sure they know what's going on. But get through it, watch the film in its entirety, and then go through it again. Go through it with a fine-tooth comb, picking apart everything, pausing every shot, doing every single bit of it, picking out the sound. What can you hear here? I also do a thing of watching some scenes to the screener and say, right, now we're just going to focus on the sound. What can you tell about the sound? And they found that such an interesting concept. I would also say, and this has been a great piece of advice to anyone who's going to teach film studies, get yourselves a streaming service. I've had that at both the schools I've taught film studies. There are various companies that do it, but it means that anything that's been on TV, if you're in education, you have a license to be able to stream. And that means that all the films that have been on there, and if you need to change a film to have it, it means the kids don't have to go out and buy DVDs, they don't have to buy Amazon Primes of it. You can say, right, this is available, get it on your phone, you need to watch the film again, you need to do this, you need to do that, watch all the films. And they can do things like screenshotting. So I often set a task of go through that section, the bit where ET first appears, and I want you to pick one shot that you thought was really good. I want you to freeze frame it, I want you to copy it into a PowerPoint, label it for all the micro features and put this on send. And then they go, that's your revision. That right there, when you get a question about cinematography, you just recall what you said about that picture. Or you get a question about the introduction of a character, all that picture. But having a streaming site, well, if you access that, makes it a million times easier. It can be painful, and I've seen people at our school absolutely hate me because like constantly badgering them, this kid needs access to this film, this thing, but it's definitely worth it. If one piece of advice, it'll be that: get yourself a streaming service.
Something you mentioned earlier when we were talking was kids don't watch films the whole way through, and students don't watch films all the way through. In fact, I don't think I watch films the whole way through because, yeah, you can pause it, etc. But also, television is quite a secondary activity, because, yeah, you might stick the telly on, but how often do you look at your phone whilst that is being shown? Or how often do you perhaps just quickly nip and go to the loo or go and get yourself a drink or a snack or something to eat? And then sometimes you might not even bother pausing the film, So the art, I think, of actually sitting and watching a film has probably been lost on lots of students. And I haven't been to the cinema, I don't think, for a good few years. But I think that's the only time where I would sit and watch a film in its whole entirety without phones, because obviously you can't have phones, and everybody does have phones, they get popcorn thrown over their heads. But, it is a secondary activity, I feel, for most people watching the television, because you have other things around you that maybe takes your primary focus.
One of the reasons I'm so keen I've organised several cinema trips since I've taken over as head department, because I think that's important. Kids going to the cinema, and I point out, one of my rules in class is if we're watching a film, you don't talk to the person next to you. And I would say, because you wouldn't talk in the cinema, and if you would talk in the cinema, everyone in the cinema hates you. And kids necessarily know that that's rude. People don't want that. They're trying to enjoy their film. So I've taken them all to the cinema and said, you're going to sit there silently, you're going to watch it, and we'll talk about it afterwards. That level of concentration. But yeah, like most people, because if I can pause a film and go and get a drink or go to the toilet or pause it and explain to whoever I'm talking to what I thought about it, I think that's really good. One of the things in film studies actually is about spectatorship and about active and passive. And although it doesn't mean, are you literally actively watching it or are you on your phone? It's about whether films engage you to think about the content. And so there's a film we watch called Captain Fantastic. And I point out to the kid, because you're going to have to think about it. It's not spoon feeding you ideas.
Sorry, James, I think we might just have lost your connection there at all. There you go. You're back again.
I was just saying that in a film that we watched, it's about making sure they were paying attention. They had to be focused on what was happening, otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. And no, that's okay. And that's like that in so many different areas as well. Just because one player doesn't mean you don't have to concentrate on that part. And I think, again, the evolution of film studies will be that realization. Prior to our discussion here tonight, we discussed a lot of things about why do we teach X? Why do we teach Y? Why do we have to teach Shakespeare? Do you have that in film studies, or is there anything else that you'd like to elaborate on?
Very different to in English. So in English, you get asked, why are we doing this? And you're teaching kids who have to do English. They don't have a choice. In film studies, if anyone says, why are we doing this? It'd be like watching films. It's a great film. I'm showing you a great film. So I don't get that in the same way. What you get in film studies is, what's the point of doing this? Like, what is the end goal of doing it? They understand why doing English is important, because they need a GCSE in English, and otherwise they have to resit it and so on. So I always find it interesting. It was really to kind of open up to you and your listeners about how do we answer that question. Now, with English, I got very good at answering it, explaining why some things are important. I found it very difficult to justify language paper 2. For example, I still don't really know why anyone would ever need to compare 19th century non-fiction to modern non-fiction. I don't know if you ever found an answer to explain to kids apart from it's in the exam, so you have to do it. Whereas with films, I can always say either, I'm going to teach you how to write about this, and that's going to help you through English, or you're going to learn something or see a time period or a country or a group of people you never would have interacted with. You're going to learn something, you're going to experience something you wouldn't have seen, wouldn't have come across. I also thought it was interesting with the question about, why do we do things? I think education is very different post-COVID, that, the kids expect to be taught in a different way and maybe take education on board in a different way. You and I discussed the other day about online teaching, and I taught film studies through the pandemic, and I had a wonderful class who were brilliant. And it turns out film studies A-level to a group of basically captive people in their rooms who had nothing better to do than sit and listen to me in the morning, watch the film midday, and then come back to me with an essay in the afternoon. It was absolutely brilliant. We rattled through hundreds of films. We watched everything. They were great. They all got A's. They're absolutely brilliant. And I thought at heart of that, and I've tried to put this in my lessons, that computer literacy is as much as primary school teachers have to teach kids how to write with a pen. But so often I get kids in my class who don't know how to save a document, don't know how to make a PowerPoint, don't know how to compose an email or to write an essay or to put something online. And so as I've got computers in my classroom, I find myself teaching computer literacy as much as anything else. This is how you save a file here. This is how you could get my sixth formers to work together on a document. And actually, often in some cases, they know more than me about it. They go, oh, yeah, we've done this, we've worked on this, we've used this program or whatever. But yeah, I was just wondering, really, it was more of a debate rather than my views on it, of how we just respond to the question of why we're doing it.
Yeah, it's always that context behind it, and you never want to hide behind because we have to, because that doesn't entice students either. So it's always trying to bring out a positive and roll out, well, this is why we do it, because it's going to help you do this and this skill. And I think, by even just in the couple of years that I've looked at the film studies curriculum, I can absolutely see that with film. I can absolutely see why you have to watch this film to understand another film. And I can actually see how well it fits in the curriculum. I think it's such an underrated subject, but actually it is getting the recognition it deserves now. And actually think about how many, it would be really good to have a survey and ask the students how many clips of films or how many YouTube videos or how many media things have you seen this week? And I bet in most lessons, they would have seen a fair amount of them. So we're seeing the evolution, not just of film, but actually of multimedia across the curriculum that is helping and benefiting our students as well.
Oh, certainly. I mean, my first lesson with my year 12s the other day was, right, you have to get your phones out and you have to sign up to the IMDb app so that whenever we watch anything, I want you to read it. I want you to learn everything about that film. And you're going to watch a film a week as part of your homework, and you're going to rate it, and you're going to read everything about it and be able to tell me everything about it. So getting that, and then from there, they go, can we watch YouTube videos explaining stuff? Yes, definitely. Why wouldn't you? If you're on YouTube anyway, why not watch some of the excellent YouTubers out there who literally go through films bit by bit and explain why they're brilliant. There's a fantastic video I directed them to where a man's done a 20-minute video about Ian McKellen's acting with his eyes in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. It's actually an incredible video. That he's done rings and got all the clips and done everything and picks it apart and explains why Ian McKellen's an absolute genius at doing that. That's not going to get put on the BBC. No one's going to commission that, but a man's done it out of love because he wants to do that. And yes, definitely go and watch it. There's a lot of good film studies students, actually they work in the media film, have loads of fantastic things in mind, loads of brilliant resources I often guide the kids towards. So yes, multimedia, getting kids to be engaged.
What do you think the future holds for film studies? I've sort of alluded to, I think that it's only going to grow. I don't think we will see a dip. I think that the more students are exposed to film studies early on, hopefully in Key Stage 3, that uptake in Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5, I think will generally evolve, because as you've said, that there isn't a niche for film studies. You don't have to be a particular student to either enjoy film studies or study film studies. So for me, I think, it's going to evolve into, like we're seeing, a psychology boom. I mean, what do you feel? You're the expert, you teach film. What have you seen over the years in your class sizes? What have you done to perhaps promote your subject?
So I've done a lot to make my subjects increase massive. But I do have some worries with, although the numbers are going up in my school, I worry about the qualification itself, because so many kids, when they're doing their coursework, say, can we mention Top Boy? I say, no, you're not allowed to mention TV series, specifically films. And they're like, oh, but I watch series. And a lot of kids do watch series and YouTube videos rather than films. And really, what I would like, because I used to teach media studies, I would like media studies to have come along with it. The head teacher of my school asked if we would consider moving from film to media studies when I took over. And I said no, and I explained why. And it's because I'd been to a school in our trust, and as their media studies course, this is in 2022, we're designing a magazine cover and a CD cover. And the teacher's doing it said she had to spend the first few weeks explaining to the kids what a magazine was and what a CD was. Fuck, there and use them. Whereas things don't go that way. Film is evolving and changing. When you look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the fact that Star Wars was a film, then it was 9 films, and now it's films and shows. You have to watch the shows to be able to understand what's going on with the films. And that in some ways, traditional films, one-off films, seem to be dying out. And franchise or straight to streaming kind of thing. So I hope that I don't have any answers either. I don't know whether they should entrench themselves and be like literature and say, no, we're going to keep it. It's just films and it's just this. We go to stories. I'll go do moving stories. You just kind of keep that going. It depends on the way education goes. Education has been very different in my teaching career. But I'm really enjoying teaching film studies. I know the kids really enjoy doing it, and I know that the people in my department teach. So I can only hope, certainly in my school.
I think you made a really good point there about the TV series. So I absolutely loved the Marvel Cinematic Universe all the way through to Endgame. And then after that, whilst I personally don't think that in itself is almost like a TV series for film. Like every single character eventually came together, but it took about 13, 14, 15 films to get to Endgame. After that, I just didn't have time to keep up with all of the television series. I didn't have time. I did watch WandaVision and Loki, but then after that, I was like, can only dip in and out a bit. And then when it comes to the next big film, I'm like, oh, well, I actually don't know X, Y, and Z, because you don't have the time to do it. And I think that's a really good point, because when big films, big franchises like Star Wars then bring in their television series as well, you sort of get left behind with the films themselves if they stand in isolation, because actually, most of the time, you need to go back and spot all of the different Easter eggs, which is obviously how franchises are built. Maybe we might even see a television series studies one day.
It's weird to think. I compared it the other day to how Dickens's novels were originally published in newspapers, and they weren't a novel; they were a weekly serial, and then they were in a novel now, and so they're happily accepted as part of the canon. Perhaps if they shoved together all of Loki or all of Andor or whatever, would it count as? Would they look back on it as part of film in the future? Whereas now there's a divide. I don't know.
How do you think then, if you're going to give any advice to teachers who are listening tonight or listening back on the podcast, how do you think teachers should incorporate film into their schemes of learning? It's not something that we can irresponsibly just throw in because it kills a couple of lessons and we get to mark our books while the students are watching a film. How do you think teachers should incorporate films into their schemes of learning?
When I spoke to other heads of department, I was glad to see they already do. One thing I would say to them is, I say, don't just watch it all the way through. Do stop it. Do talk about it. If you're watching Titanic in history, Don't just assume the story of Rose and Jack is going to be enough for them. Pause it and say, look at the opulence of this room, and then pause it again later and go, look at where the third class people are. Look at that. Look at the class differences and what that tells us, what we can learn in MFL if they're watching a film in a foreign language. Look how people dress differently, or look how they behave differently, or look at the response of in the German film we watched. The parents are really kind of, the kids are the sensible ones, and the parents are so kind of free. There's a family who let their 12-year-old son smoke, but they're really quite well-off family. And you think, why are they doing that? And they say, oh, it's important for him to choose, because they grew up in a kind of a Germany where it was really important to be free and to be kind of liberal. So it's a really interesting thing. What I'd also say is that there should be a film for every occasion, like how I really also think there's an episode of The Simpsons for every occasion.
Yeah, I imagine that. Yeah, I reckon that'll be more than a 5-year curriculum as well. Probably even more than 7. So as we wind down here, some quick fire questions that I do try to ask most of my guests, if not all of them, just, for us to get to know you a little bit better. Favourite book?
Wilt by Tom Sharp.
Okay, why?
It's a really funny book if you've not read it. It's my answer when I get asked this, because obviously when you're an English teacher and you move schools, the head teacher says, what's your favourite book?
Yeah.
And I say this and they say, why? And I say, it's about a jaded English teacher who's fed up with teaching Lord of the Flies to a load of people who aren't interested, plots to kill his wife. And they sort of look at me like, I see. So that's always been my go-to answer. So Wilt by Tom Sharp. So it's just a chaotic book.
Yeah, nice. I like it. Best learning technique that you could give our teachers. How do you think students learn the best, from your opinion?
Fun and games. Make your lessons memorable. Now, the lesson I remember most from being in school, my first ever English lesson in secondary school, my wonderful teacher, Mr. Scales, said, right, boys, come on, out we go. And he took us out into the playground and he set fire to the bin. And it was, you were looking at the time going, what's happening? What's going on? But everyone remembers that. He did it with every year he was there, and everyone remembers. Do you remember going on the playground and Mr. Scales set fire to the bin? And you remember that lesson. You remember what the focus was. Everyone did that piece of homework. You had to write up what it was like. And he said, you can write that you thought it was mad. You can write whatever you want, but you're writing me an essay about it tonight. And everyone remembers that. Make it memorable. Make it fun.
Just to clarify, there was a learning outcome. He's not just an arsonist.
Yeah, he was. It wasn't later section. Well, I mean, he might have been. It's not because I was there.
And best advice you've ever been given?
My favourite piece of advice ever is it's easier to ask forgiveness than to ask permission, but maybe not when running a school trip. So I thought for in terms of education, and if there's any sort of trainee teachers, really, most kids are all right. A teacher, quite an old guy, said that to me when I was on my training year. He said, "Don't forget that most kids are all right." He said, even if there's a few making life difficult or messing around or doing, most of them are all right. He said, if you go around in the world, you don't walk down the high street thinking that everyone's going to try and get you or everyone's out to get you. These kids are going to grow up into the people of the world. Most people are all right. Don't be scared.
Yeah, I completely agree as well. Otherwise, we won't be in this job. Final piece of advice to all teachers and tutors who are film studies teachers and listening to this radio show.
Please share your resources. There's a wonderful shared drive that we use, and it's so good for when I took over and I hadn't seen some of the films that you taught, and I wasn't an expert in some of the things. Just being able to go, right, there's a PowerPoint now, and take that, use that. There's a scheme of work there. Teaching is a thing that all teachers in the country are in it to help the kids. No one, I hope, is in it to make loads of money by selling resources and doing anything. If you make something good, share it and let someone else use it. Let someone else, you borrow it, improve it, they put it back on, you can get it back. Sharing resources and data, I think, is something that we talked about. The use of technology. Teachers can be using that so much more. Sharing ideas, sharing plans, sharing PowerPoints, and sharing great clips.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me today on this edition of The Late Late Show. As a friend, it's always great to catch up, and I want to thank you for your time today and all of the insight, advice, help and positivity you've brought to the radio show. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I have, and I wish you nothing but the best in this upcoming year. Join me next week on The Late Late Show, where I'll be joined by Jane Panter, an expert in tutoring boys groups and seeking out what is best for boys in the ever-growing divide between the genders in education. Thank you all for listening, either live or as a podcast on the Listen Back on Teachers Talk Radio. I look forward to seeing you all next week. But for now, stay safe, take care, and see you soon.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.
And